In San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, Donald Trump's meeting with Kim Jong-un produced a handshake and a promise to keep talking, but was light on details. What does the summit signal for what's to come? Plus, is Silicon Valley still the beating heart of tech investing? We'll talk to 500 startup CEO Christine Tsai about the next chapter at the firm after a high-profile Me Too departure and their focus on international growth. And Tesla announces job cuts, about 9% across the company. CEO Elon Musk promises this won't impact Model 3 production targets. We will gauge investor reaction. First to our top story. President Trump has left Singapore after a historic meeting with North Korea's Kim Jong-un. The two world leaders signed an agreement to begin a process they say will lead to the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. Before returning to the United States, President Trump gave an extended news conference going over his discussions with the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, and all that he believes they accomplished.
My meeting with Chairman Kim was honest, direct, and productive. We're prepared to start a new history, and we're ready to write a new chapter between our nations. There is no limit to what North Korea can achieve when it gives up its nuclear weapons and embraces commerce and engagement with the rest of the world that really wants to engage. People thought this could never take place. It is now taking place. It's a very great day. It's a very great moment in the history of the world. We will be stopping the war games, which will save us a tremendous amount of money. This is complete denuclearization of North Korea, and it will be verified. We signed a very, very comprehensive document, and I believe he's going to live up to that document. All I can say is they want to make a deal. That's what I do. My whole life has been deals. I've done great at it, and that's what I do.
Joining us now in Washington, Patricia Kim, fellow at Stanton Nuclear Security. She specializes in Chinese foreign policy, U.S.-China relations, and East Asian security issues. Also with us, Bill Ferries, Bloomberg's national security team leader. Bill, I will start with you. Lots of promises, not so much substance. Would you call this a success?
Well, there is a way to define it as a success. It's the first time the leaders of the U.S. and North Korea ever met. And when you think about where we were a year ago with both leaders trading very public threats of nuclear war, it certainly is a success to see the two of them just meeting in person, talking, and coming up with some sort of an agreement. The president described it as a comprehensive agreement. It's a little over 400 words. It has very few details, so I don't think many other people would describe it that way. But it's certainly a very initial step, at least, in what I think people would say is the right direction compared to a year ago.
Patricia, walk us through what we know about North Korea's actual nuclear facilities and how they might go about dismantling them.
It's very hard to say. North Korea has never given a full accounting of its nuclear facilities or its program, and that was actually one of the things that experts hoped would come from this summit, that North Korea would agree to give a full accounting, open up its borders so that we can actually determine what kind of facilities it has, how many weapons it has. But this agreement that the two sides signed yesterday, fell short, very short of that. It just, pledged North Korea to this vague concept of the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. So it's hard to say at this point exactly what the roadmap to denuclearization looks like.
So, Bill, then what's next? I mean, there's nothing in here about enforcement and verification, it seems, would be quite difficult.
Right. We have no information on how they're going to carry that out, what the next steps are. Our Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is due on Wednesday to travel to Seoul to brief South Korean officials who themselves seemed a little bit surprised by some of the president's announcements, particularly about his call to end the war games or military exercises that have really been a hallmark of U.S.-South Korea relations for decades now. So he goes from South Korea, he'll travel on to Beijing and return to Washington Thursday late or Friday morning. But then really the hard decisions come perhaps perhaps for Pompeo's team and the other negotiators in terms of hammering out some kind of a timeline or next steps. The president said he was willing to invite Kim Jong-un to the White House, but I think most people would expect there to be some sort of an agreement on what does denuclearization look like, how does it get carried out, when do inspectors enter the country. These are all going to be very hard questions for the North Koreans to deal with, but they'll be essential to ensuring that some kind of a deal actually takes place.
Patricia, in the past, we've relied on satellite imagery, on past nuclear tests. Are there any technological solutions here to get more information about what North Korea still does and may not have in the future?
I mean, frankly, I think until North Korea opens up its borders and allows in invasive inspections, we will have to continue to rely on these sort of outward ways of looking in, sort of satellite imagery, as you said, or guesswork by experts. But until it opens its borders and gives a clear accounting of its nuclear program, it'll be very hard to have any specifics.
Bill, continued economic sanctions. Talk to us about the impact we will see there when it comes to cross-border trade.
Well, that's a very interesting development because right before the summit, Secretary of State Pompeo laid out really a red line. He said the sanctions will remain until there's verifiable denuclearization of North Korea. Yet soon after the summit ended, we heard talk from Chinese officials saying that maybe the sanctions were something that should be looked at now, perhaps as some kind of a reward for the process inching forward. So there will be a potential battle taking place on the UN Security Council if the Chinese really do go forward and propose some sort of an easing of sanctions. And there will be a lot of analysis of satellite data and the kind of imagery you talked about earlier in terms of trying to find out, is there more illegal trade going on? Are there ship-to-ship transfers of oil, for instance, taking place off the coast? Those are all things that the intelligence agencies and the diplomatic community are going to have to be watching very closely.
Patricia, clearly much remains to be seen, but does what happened today, will it have ripple effects? Will it impact nuclear arsenals across the globe?
So what implications will this have for nuclear proliferation across the globe? It's very hard to say at this point. I think to be honest, it's hard to think about what the outside consequences. I think there's so much more to be solved just with North Korea. Again, what does this mean for dismantling North Korea's nuclear weapons program? Is there a timeline in place? Have they agreed to verification? None of these details of the negotiations have come out. It is concerning that the president has been willing, that President Trump signed on to such a vague agreement after talking about the Iran deal and how that failed to really constrain Iran. So it's unclear what this means going forward for non-proliferation generally.
All right, Patricia Kim, Stanton Nuclear Security Fellow and Bloomberg's own National Security Team Leader, Bill Ferries, thank you both. Of course, we'll continue to follow. Well, female engineers fighting Microsoft over gender discrimination claims were told by a judge there may be a fatal flaw in their case. A 2011 Supreme Court decision requires plaintiffs to find a common corporate policy or action that affected the women, the judge said, and he seemed skeptical about their ability to do so. The complaint, filed almost 3 years ago, alleges that Microsoft discriminated against women engineers in pay and promotions. Coming up, a venture capital firm that has made its name in Silicon Valley is striking a major deal in the Middle East. We will speak to 500 Startup CEO Christine Tsai next. This is Bloomberg. Silicon Valley remains home to the biggest tech firms in the world and is the epicenter of tech funding and deals. But in the last few years, some venture capitalists have gone global. The latest example, earlier this spring, San Francisco-based 500 Startups announced it struck a deal with the Abu Dhabi Financial Group, which now owns a stake of the company and helps oversee operations. It is one of the most significant moves from 500 Startup CEO Christine Tsai, who took over the position last summer after a high-profile Me Too departure. Christine joins me now here in the studio. Let's talk about this Abu Dhabi deal. It is very unusual. How will this actually work?
So our mission has always been to discover and back the world's most talented entrepreneurs, help them build successful companies at scale, and build thriving global ecosystems. And over the past 8 years, we feel like we've made a lot of progress, but we've just scratched the surface. We've invested in more than 2,000 companies around 16 countries around the world, and we feel like our mission is far from done. And in terms of our partnership and investment with ADFG, Abu Dhabi Financial Group, we're looking forward to taking 500 to the next level. They've joined our board. They have a minority stake in the company, and we're looking forward to having them help us further 500's mission and continuing to serve entrepreneurs around the world.
Do you worry about giving up control?
I actually think it's an interesting question when you look at what's happened in Silicon Valley, especially over the last couple of years. When you think about the concept of governance, when you look at VC, there's not really much sense of governance. I mean, you have limited partners who are investors in the fund, but really for most early stage VCs in Silicon Valley, it's really the private partnership. It's different from an operating company where you do have more of a board of directors where you would expect some of that governance to happen. So for us, we feel like there's a lot of synergy between us and ADFG, and we're looking forward to having them involved at the board level.
So how did LPs feel about this, and did you lose any LPs as a result?
No, actually, the reaction we found from a lot of LPs was they were very excited about 500 having additional institutional support from ADFG, both from the kind of the operating company perspective as well as our funds. In the near future, they do plan to anchor our upcoming funds, and all in all, for LPs, most of the reaction was very positive.
Now, 500 startups actually went global when it was not en vogue, though there is still some skepticism about international investments. Are you seeing returns?
For the last 8 years, we've invested in international companies, with our vision to be the most global Silicon Valley VC. And from the early days, it was definitely something that was seen as a bit curious, questionable.
Right, you went to Southeast Asia when it wasn't cool.
Exactly, exactly. And when we look at the companies we've invested in over the past 8 years, in terms of some of the very promising companies, a lot of them have come from outside of Silicon Valley, outside of the U.S. Some examples include Grab, Carousel, TalkDesk, which was originally from outside of the U.S. and has since set up headquarters here in San Francisco. But there's just a lot of opportunity in terms of talent, as well as now, 8 years later, from when we first started investing internationally, downstream capital, and just a lot more interest in early stage tech. A lot of these markets see tech as the future of economic development, of job creation, and we've observed this over the last 8 years in terms of course, all of us have seen increase in consumer tech product adoption and just capital that's being deployed into tech and entrepreneurship. A lot of it's been driven by governments because they see this as just the future of their market.
So if there is so much opportunity, why isn't Andreessen Horowitz and the like jumping on the bandwagon? Why do they avoid global investing?
It's definitely not for the faint of heart. I think that a firm can do very well just investing in a 50-mile radius. So it's really to each their own. I think for a lot of Silicon Valley, I think now the question of whether there's opportunity in international markets is less of a question. It's clear there is. More than 50% of private companies that are valued over $1 billion. Our beloved unicorn terminology. Most of the, more than 50% of them are outside of the U.S. So I think no one questions that. I think in terms of different GPs and what their expertise is and the willingness to go into a market and really understand the nuances and what trends are there, it's hard. And for us, we've definitely seen the ups and downs of trying to go into different markets. It's not easy. I do think that, for example, in terms of what you see as hot and exciting in Silicon Valley, typical things come up like blockchain, crypto, AI, all the buzzwords you can think of. It would be, interesting to see some of that same fervor put into investing into global markets, because as we've seen, the world has gotten smaller. We're starting to see, even US-based companies, corporate strategics acquiring international, what were once startups. And so we see just a lot of opportunity in these emerging markets.
So I know 500 Startups is trying to turn a new page, develop its new identity, but I have to ask about Dave. This is founder, former CEO who left amidst allegations of sexual harassment and even assault, and there were allegations that people at the firm knew as this was happening and didn't act soon enough. I remember when he hired you, he was so excited, and I imagine that this has been tough for you. Do you still talk to him, and how are you weathering this transition?
Yeah, you know, last year was really, I guess the best way to call it is a reboot for the firm. You know, we worked together as a team to reset our mission and values, our culture, our policies, and even our strategy as a firm. And so, you know, for us, we're really looking forward to how we move forward, and in many ways we have. And so, you know, we feel like there's a lot of, me personally, you know, I feel like there's a lot of positive momentum in Silicon Valley, and you know, for us as a global firm, we look at this from a global perspective in terms of whether that's going to turn into sustainable, meaningful change for the industry. I think it remains to be seen. So to me, it just emphasizes that we really need to focus on our mission and our values and contributing to this meaningful change, both in terms of the investments we make as well as, you know, who we work with and our own team.
Do you still talk to him? Is he still involved?
Well, today, you know, Dave does not have any control or governance over 500. I would say, you know, if you think of it as many co-founders who separate, the relationships vary. You know, we do still communicate, but, you know.
So, you know, I find it interesting that you're taking money from a culture that has, you know, potentially deep-seated problems with sexism. You know, how would you address the skeptics there, that is where the money is coming from?
I think that it's you know, what comes to mind is a little bit of xenophobia, to be honest, when you think about where the money comes from, and, you know, that, say, foreign money is somehow not as good or less moral than institutional money here in the US. I mean, we've seen all sorts of things come out in terms of either institutions, firms, corporates that do have similar issues. So I guess focus just on ADFG as a firm. We've known them for several years. They align very well with our mission and values, and to me that was critical for the firm to make sure that there were these synergies and alignment in what we truly believe. In terms of the Middle East, North Africa region as a whole, I think there obviously are, you know, skeptics around what you just mentioned, but I think in terms of looking forward and the progress they're making, I would focus on that. Within the Middle East, all the different all the different countries are different, and so I think this is really actually a chance to show that they've invested into a female-led firm, a firm that is investing and looks to invest in diverse founders and businesses, because we believe it's just good business.
So it's good to see you as a CEO. What are you doing to invest in women, hire more women, promote more women?
Mm-hmm. I think for us, you know, I think it really does start from that very, in my mind, very simple belief that it's good for performance, it's good for business. And so for us, from the beginning, it's always been very important. I think we look at it in two ways. One is obviously how we're deploying capital and how we're recruiting deal flow, and really actively seeking out female founder deal flow, as well as deal flow from underrepresented minorities. I think there's a lot of intersectionality between the two that often gets overlooked, and for us that is important in terms of how we recruit deal flow for our accelerator batches, as well as, I guess, the other side of the equation, who is deploying the capital and ensuring that we do have that diverse perspective on the investment side of the investment team. You know, right now, just as it relates to gender, about 31%, myself included, of our investment partners are female. And for us, we want to continue to push ourselves to do even better as it relates to both investments as well as our staff.
Christine Tsai, CEO of 500 Startups, thank you so much.
Thank you
for stopping by. Coming up, Tesla announces it is cutting 9% of its total workforce. What does it mean for the car maker's ambitious production schedule? This is Bloomberg. Tesla says it plans to cut about 9% of jobs across the company. In an internal memo, CEO Elon Musk says the cuts won't impact Model 3 production targets, and no further cuts are planned. Joining us now, Max Chafkin, who writes about tech in Bloomberg Businessweek. So, Max, what do you make of it?
Wow. Well, it's been quite a week. I guess every week is pretty exciting for Elon Musk. But yesterday the stock jumped a lot when he promised that there'll be some additional self-driving capabilities in Tesla cars. And today, as you say, we saw this layoff announcement. It's something that Tesla had telegraphed. Elon Musk had talked about a reorganization. He'd also said that the company, was going to try to get to profitability in the third quarter, which was, clearly going to require some heroics. So we're sort of seeing the other shoe drop here. So on that side, people might feel good about this. This is the company finally, getting serious, getting towards profitability. On the other hand, it can't be great for employee morale to let something like 3,000 people go.
Musk tweeted, difficult but necessary Tesla reorg underway. My email to the company has already leaked to the media. Here it is unfiltered, and he posted the whole thing. Your point about investors, is this going to be welcome news if it doesn't impact the production schedule as he says? Does this prove he's willing to make difficult decisions for the bottom line?
It's really hard to say. And in the moments after this memo was first reported by Bloomberg, the stock started falling pretty precipitously. Part of what's going on here is that a lot of the people who are betting on Tesla are not super concerned about the production numbers in the short term. What they're concerned about is the future. They want Tesla to be, the world's biggest car company, to sort of rewrite the rules for transportation and energy storage, and letting, a large percentage of your staff go, while it may not impact production in the short term, may not include any factory workers, that isn't so great if what you're really concerned about is the future.
So what's next? I mean, we're gonna see these cuts happen. Do we know where they're coming from? He says they're coming from salaried employees, and how that will affect the rest of the business.
Yeah, we don't know yet. And Tesla and Elon Musk have been, historically very good at getting things done very efficiently, at creating new innovations. What's coming, down the pipe, besides the Model 3, we'll see some Model 3 production numbers after this quarter, and that'll be a big point. The next thing would be probably the driverless car things that he's talked about. If Tesla is able to do something amazing there, that'll probably move things around. And then the next really big thing coming for Tesla will be the launch of the Model Y, which is the sort of compact SUV. That's a really popular class of cars that Musk has promised for next March. I mean, that's a long way off, and it's hard to see how Tesla gets there if they're laying people off, if they're having to deal with this quote-unquote production hell.
Bloomberg Business Week's Max Chavkin, thank you so much. Coming up, a historic summit between the U.S. and North Korea brings promises of denuclearization. We will continue to dig through the implications for global tech next. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Back to our top story, a historic summit between President Trump and North Korea's Kim Jong-un. The U.S. and North Korea agreed to seek complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula following the summit. And yet no deadline was set, and the path to disarmament remains undefined. President Trump also said Kim has accepted an invitation to visit the White House, but no date for that either. Joining us now, Bloomberg's chief Washington correspondent Kevin Cirilli, who is on the ground in Singapore. Kevin, give us the color of the promise yet lack of substance here.
It was quite remarkable to not see the details of what had been a months-long summit in the making, Emily, come to fruition here in Singapore. Now, we should note President Trump en route back to the United States already. He has been calling his allies around the world, including Chinese President Xi Jinping and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. His top diplomats, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, will be touring North Asia to meet with allies of South Korea and Japan to continue to lay out the case. But meanwhile, back in the U.S., the fallout already continuing, not just from Democrats who are urging the president to take a more cautious approach to verify whether or not North Korea is actually going to denuclearize also from Republicans, people like Senator Marco Rubio, Republican from Florida, as well as the likes of Senators McCain, Kennedy, Republicans from Arizona and Louisiana, respectively, raising their concerns about how to verify North Korea chairman, as the president's now referring to him, Kim Jong-un, for how he plans to denuclearize. Put more broadly, the president will need congressional approval should he decide to ease back economic sanctions. No sign of that yet, but as you mentioned, I mean, the president, by all accounts, basically extending an open invitation to Kim Jong-un to come to the White House and saying that this is just the first of many steps to come in a dialogue with North Korea. At that press conference, that marathon press conference, the final point I'll make, more than 75 minutes, President Trump taking questions, he actually was more praiseworthy of Kim Jong-un than he was of Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Emily.
Well, that's not difficult to do. Kevin, talk to us a little bit about the reaction inside North Korea. As far as we know, how do we imagine North Koreans are receiving this news?
It's such an interesting question because there's such limited reports about access into North Korea, and in fact the propaganda arm, I can't even, as a journalist, you know this, call it journalism because it's the state-run propaganda arm, barely even acknowledged that Kim Jong-un was going to be meeting with President Donald Trump here in Singapore until just a couple of hours before that actual meeting. Then, right behind me, you're staring at this beautiful backdrop of the downtown Singapore. Kim Jong-un had only made 4 international trips since assuming power. This is the 4th trip that he's made to China, as well as to the demilitarized zones on the Korean Peninsula. But here in Singapore, this recluse of a world leader actually took his sister out, as well as his top advisors, and toured downtown Singapore 12 hours before meeting, about 12 hours before meeting with President Trump. Very remarkable. And then as someone who has covered candidate Donald Trump since the beginning of his campaign, and obviously President Donald Trump now, I've seen President Trump interact with many, many different types of world leaders. I'm no body language expert, Emily, but his interactions with Kim Jong-un were more warm and welcoming than with German Chancellor Angela Merkel.
Again, not hard to do, more Macron-esque, I would say. Bloomberg's chief Washington correspondent, tirelessly covering this story for us on the ground in Singapore. Kevin, thank you so much. So, are President Trump and Kim Jong-un, are they still talking? Are they texting? If so, what kind of phone might they be using, at least in North Korea? According to research from U.S. cybersecurity firm Recorded Future, it is likely being done using a device made by an American company. For more on this study, we are joined by Bloomberg Tech's Julie Verhage, who wrote about this topic in Bloomberg's Fully Charged newsletter. Julie, North Korea may not be as disconnected as we think. What kind of devices are available in North Korea, and who's using them?
Right. Well, at least the leaders in North Korea might not be as disconnected as what we think. So Kim Jong-un has been photographed a number of times using, MacBook computers and other devices. And this study shows that there's actually been a lot of leaders. They can't name names and say how many each of them have, but there's been a lot of exports of computers and other devices that are being used by them in North Korea, which is contrary to what many would believe with sanctions and the way that typical North Koreans actually end up using and accessing the internet. It's very, state sanctioned. They're only allowed to access certain sites and go through different, products. It's usually not an iPhone, it's something else. So this was shocking in that a lot of the leaders over there are bucking that trend, and they're actually still getting access to things like the iPhone X or the Samsung Galaxy.
Samsung is interesting given, of course, it's in their backyard, and yet their mortal enemy in South Korea. How does the use of Apple devices compare to Samsung devices?
Right. Again, it can't say exactly how many each of them have, but there were a lot of, it lists a number of devices that are on there, and there were a lot of Samsung devices, various versions of it, and then everything from, the iPhone 6 to the iPhone X. So it has been a lot of new products. I will say that most of them appear to be, they said it gravitates towards older devices, so things that are running on older software. So it does appear that maybe the sanctions have gotten, obviously tougher before yesterday's meeting, and that might have, pared back some of those exports where they're not, maybe Kim Jong-un does not have access to the iPhone X yet. But if yesterday went well, like it sounds it has so far, maybe he will be able to get one in the future.
Is there concern that some of these products, specifically American products, could be used in cyber espionage?
Right, absolutely. That's one of the big concerns, because a lot of these might be used, and a lot of the espionage might be happening outside of mainland North Korea. But some of it is, and that is a big concern, saying they could be using, software, devices from an American company to do things like cyber espionage and work on these, threats to the United States using American products. And that is something the report calls out as, a reason for concern of them using it. Although, again, if they do, in fact, go away from all these nuclear plans, denuclearize the nation, then that wouldn't be as much of a problem going forward.
All right, Bloomberg Tech's Julie Verhage, fascinating stuff. Thank you. Well, Uber has unveiled a light version of its app for emerging markets. The version will enable the ride-booking app even when there is spotty internet connectivity, and it'll take up just 5 megabytes of storage on 99% of Android phones. The app is available in India and will roll out to more countries. Coming up, we will discuss the future of machine learning and bots with Phil Libin, the former Evernote CEO, has a new company focusing on AI. This is Bloomberg. From big tech to startups, there's a new crop of players and companies trying to expand their presence in AI, and that includes All-Turtles, a new startup studio with a growing international presence. For more, I want to get to Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde in London. Caroline?
Emily, thanks very much indeed. And we're joined by the co-founder of All-Turtles. It is a man we know well from the startup scene, Phil Libin. You said telling me you've been in it basically for more than 2 decades now, the tech ecosystem. And what is the problem you were trying to solve with All-Turtles?
Well, I think the central inefficiency of the tech system is that we are forcing brilliant product people to make companies. And making companies are super hard. And when you think about it, it doesn't really make any sense, because if you're one of the most talented, like Mozart-level genius musicians alive today, you don't have to make a music company. You just play music, and the platforms exist to reach 1 billion people. Why does it have to be different for the most talented product people? Why can't product people just make a product rather than going through all of the difficulty of making and keeping a company first?
So you're helping build products through All-Turtles, and you're helping bring it to Europe. This is why you're here. You're about to announce that you've settled down roots in France.
That's right. Yeah, we're doing this worldwide. Part of what we believe in is by eliminating this requirement for people to make little companies first before they make products, we can unlock innovation wherever there's brilliant people and lots of culture and lots of trained engineers and designers. And so Europe is a great place for that. So yeah, we are opening up in Station F in Paris as our European hub, but we'll have teams all over Europe.
You've already got teams all over Europe.
Yeah, we actually have 5 different products that we're building and helping build all over Europe.
So what sort of products?
So everything we work on is, we call it practical AI, which means that it solves a very easy to describe problem in a very non-magical seeming way, but it would have been impossible to make 3 years ago because the technology stack just wasn't there. So we're using the hard AI platforms that were developed over the past couple of years and productizing them to just make easy to explain products. Like the one that we're about to launch is called Spot, which is publicly available. You can go to talktospot.com and see it, and it's an AI for reporting workplace harassment and discrimination. Very straightforward way, a very big problem, but something that's easy to understand how to help fix. But had we tried to build that 3 or 4 years ago, it would have taken many more resources because the technology stack just wasn't there, but now it's possible for the first time ever.
So there's a product that has a market fit. Say suddenly Spot, you're getting plenty of inbound demand, you're getting the boots on the ground. Do you then scale that? Do you then make that a company?
We could, but the idea is we want to get to impact first and then think about scale.
Okay.
This is actually a big difference in how the world is structured right now. In the olden days, when I was making my first couple of companies, you needed to get to scale before you could have impact because you needed to be big enough so that you can get the economics to a point where you can actually reach a lot of people. None of that is true anymore. Now you get to impact first. You solve a real sharp problem for somebody first, and then you decide how big should it be to have the most impact. So we want to get to the product first, make sure it works, make sure people love it, make sure people find it valuable, and then ask, well, does it need 20 people? Does it need 1,000 people? And we're fine supporting anything in that range.
Talk to us about, therefore, you seem to be moving against the grain of how technology has been built as an ecosystem. There's backlash against big tech at the moment in general. We're seeing
tech, small tech, yeah, backlash everywhere.
And what do you think about that? How do you? I saw your post on LinkedIn about how you watched Mark Zuckerberg take to the stage in front of politicians. How do you think Silicon Valley is dealing with the backlash, and how do you view it?
You know, I think the world is getting a more realistic view of Silicon Valley, which is it isn't really a place to be lionized. There's a lot of great things about Silicon Valley. There's a lot of innovation coming out of it. But there's also a lot of fundamental problems and inefficiencies that are getting baked into the system by Silicon Valley. The biggest problem probably is because so much of the Silicon Valley culture is about taking shortcuts. It's about moving as quickly as possible. And when you're a big company, you can afford to do that thoughtfully. But when you're a small company, when you're a startup, and you're getting forced by your investors to move as quickly as you possibly can, you have to take shortcuts. And very often, the shortcut actually winds up hurting you at the end. So if you need to hire as many people as possible in the next 2 weeks, the natural thing to do is to just call up all your friends and say, hey, let's come work together, which is fine, except then you only wind up hiring people that look like you, that you're friends with, and you never get a diverse team, and then you don't have a broad idea of what the product should be, and all of these short-term things catch up with you. So one of the things we're trying to do is to really learn from the rest of the world and give products more altitude, more oxygen to take long-term decisions that are better for everyone.
What about some of the ways, the practical applications of AI that you're helping? Could they solve some of the issues that are the core? I mean, fake news comes to mind, the issue of the fact that manipulation can be occurring within the electoral system. Are these issues that you're looking at?
We are, actually. Everything that we work on has a strong component of being good for the world. We won't work on a product or a project unless we think that the world is at least slightly better off if this thing succeeds in it. That's a very important criteria for us. Everything we work on has to solve a real problem. Like it has to be the problem first. We look for a crisply articulated, acutely felt problem, or else we won't work on it. And that actually eliminates probably 95% of the kind of pitches that I would see as an investor, because 95% of the time, maybe 98% of the time, when you get pitched something, it isn't because of a real problem. It's because someone has fell in love with some technology, or they're chasing some perceived market need. And that's especially true in Silicon Valley when most of the pitches you hear are basically from Stanford kids. You know, Stanford kids don't have a lot of problems. So they tend not to focus on solving these problems. They tend to focus on these things which are technology first. We'd rather be problem first and then find the best people to work on them with technology.
You're still an advisor to General Catalyst. In fact, they're backing all turtles. So what do you say to the people at General Catalyst? I fundamentally don't agree with the ecosystem that you're helping perpetuate.
I think we're working at different scales. I think we're really trying to take what we do globally, take it outside of Silicon Valley, take it outside of the core centers of where startups already happen. You know, General Catalyst is an amazing venture capital firm. There's other great firms. What they're really good at is writing big checks to teams that, frankly, don't need their help very much, because they've already kind of got everything they need to be successful, and they need some help around the edges, some introductions, help going public, that sort of thing. What we want to work on is we want to work on fundamental problems with founders who maybe aren't well-rounded CEOs, who maybe wouldn't want to start a company. We just want them to focus their brilliance on the product, and then we create basically an entire ecosystem to make sure that those products get real. So I think it's quite complementary to the top-tier VC model.
Phil Libin, always great to get your perspective. Thank you very much for joining us here in Europe. Of course, Phil Libin, CEO and co-founder of All Turtles. Emily, fascinating sort of turning the current model of Silicon Valley on its head.
Well, and interesting given the conversation you had with the London mayor yesterday about how, he's touting London as the AI capital of Europe. This, as a company like Uber might say, well, hey, you're kind of stifling our innovation.
It all seems to be really focused upon, the means and ways and what's at the heart of companies at the moment, and the ways in which they behave themselves, and certainly whether AI can be a force for good or negative there. I think it's really interesting the way that London is driving as well the focus on not only the ethics behind it. That seems to be something that London's really trying to spearhead at the moment, and something that Phil Libin seems to be thinking about as well.
It's all relative. The AI capital of Europe is one thing. The AI capital of the world, that is another thing. Okay, Caroline, thank you so much. Please tell Phil we said hi. Coming up, long-range wireless charging has been promised for years. So why has it yet to reach the mass market? We're going to hear from a leader in this space. The CEO of Energis joins us next. This is Bloomberg. Amazon is rebooting its film and TV studio business with Jennifer Salke, who has signed Oscar-winning writer and director Jordan Peele to a first-look deal with his company, Monkey Paw Productions. In a challenge to compete with Netflix, the world's largest online retailer has tasked Salke with rehabilitating its reputation in Hollywood after the departure of Roy Price amid allegations of sexual misconduct. Over a year ago, Energis announced that 5 consumer electronics companies would use its wireless charging technology. Yet, shareholders focused on a huge name missing from that list, and that is Apple. Today, Apple's still missing from the list of companies Energis works with. The company, though, is pushing towards the latest in wireless charging using radio frequency waves to enable both contact-based and at-a-distance wireless charging solutions for a complete ecosystem. So, why isn't Apple racing towards Energis' technology? Joining us here, the CEO, Stephen Rizzone. Also with us, we have Bloomberg Tech's Mark Gurman, who covers consumer devices and all things Apple. So, Stephen, why isn't Apple on your list?
So let's be clear, we've not said one way or another. We don't speak about our strategic partners. It's a very proprietary thing. What we can say is that we're working with the largest consumer electronic companies in the world, and that you'll begin to see these devices now hit the market in the next few weeks and rapidly accelerating through the end of the year.
So this technology has been promised for years, but we still haven't seen it yet. What is actually possible when it comes to long-range wireless charging technology?
So Energis represents wireless charging 2.0, which is really the ultimate implementation of this capability. It represents charging on a contact basis, where you can take your device, your mobile device, your smartphone, your headset, and quickly charge it on a mat. And at the same time, that same headset or that same mobile phone can be charged while you're walking through the office or while you're in your car with a watt-up-based transmitter in the dome light of your automobile. So the idea of wireless charging 2.0, which Energis is the major proponent, is really the ability to charge mobile devices from contact distance. When we're talking about distance, we're talking about distances of 15 to 18 feet.
In terms of the different technologies, so how many different types of technologies? I know you have the contact base, then you have the long range. There's a medium range as well, right? I've seen at your offices the short range and the medium range in action. How long do you think will be until we see like a 10 to 15 foot range for wireless charging?
So our plan is to release transmitters in 3 iterations. The first iteration is contact-based transmitters. As I mentioned, you'll start to see those hit the consumer markets in the coming weeks. The next iteration is the first distance iteration. It's desktop. It's from 3 feet out or so. And we think that those transmitters will start to hit the market late this year, early next year. The full size or the long distance transmitters with the ability to charge devices 15 to 18 feet will probably be hitting the consumer markets at the end of 2019. All while a number of receiving devices, and this is very, very important, all receiving devices are compatible with all transmitters. And so we expect to see a number of announcements in the coming months of receivers in a number of different verticals, including wearables, hearing aids, hearables.
Right.
So why has it taken so long for this technology to get to market?
Well, it's not really a matter of taking so long. Energis as a company was really launched 4 years ago, and when we did our IPO in March of 2014. So we're a fabless semiconductor company, and in terms of coming to market with new silicon, that's really actually moving very, very quickly. It's a very complex system, though. I mean, we are a fabless semiconductor company. That's our go-to-market strategy. But in conjunction with that, we develop reference designs that include antennas and software and hardware. And also you have the whole regulatory element. And that's a very, very important consideration, because this is brand new technology. It's never been released or it's never been approved from the regulatory agencies. And we're actually paving the way for that, which is I think one of our big accomplishments.
And to be fair, so Apple announced their AirPower wireless charger last year, and it's already been about 8-9 months since they announced it. So Apple, as much money and resources they haven't been able able to pull this off yet, and they have a Qi-based charger. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between the Qi technology that everyone's talking about and whatever the underlying technology is in the Energis suite of products?
Absolutely. So Qi is a first-generation technology. It's been around for 10 years or so. It's an inductive technology, and it has serious limitations, and I think those are some of the problems that the implementers of this technology are starting to realize. It has foreign object detection problems. If you place a device, a Qi-enabled device on a mat and it has keys attached to it or whatever, these will heat up and cause serious health hazards. It has interference problems. It has limited to no independent positioning capability. You have to be very, very exact where you place the device. These are all very limiting factors in terms of the overall user experience and the utility. Wireless charging 2.0, which Energis is the leader, really eliminates all of those problems. We have no foreign object detection problems. We have no interference problems. We're completely free in terms of the positioning. You can drop these devices anywhere on the mat. And then at the same time, you have the ultimate benefit in that same receiver can now be lifted from the mat and be charging while you're walking around the studio.
Mark, quickly, optimistic?
Optimistic. I mean, 2019 seems aggressive, right, for 10 to 15 feet, and we'll see. I mean, are you confident it's going to happen?
It's the technology. It's all the same technology. It's all the same silicon. It's a matter of how it rolls out. Thank you.
Stephen Rizzone, CEO of Energis. Mark Gurman, you'll keep us honest. Thank you both. That is it for today's edition of Bloomberg Technology. Tomorrow we will be on the ground broadcasting from E3 in LA. I will be there. We'll talk to everyone. Don't miss it. This is Bloomberg.